Look at the French team at the last World Cup. All these top players were born in France, but look, 7 of the 11 players have parents from former colonies. Here they are, huge African territories the size of 18 of today's France. Then there's North America. Just a couple of centuries ago, a huge part of modern Canada and the United States also belonged to France. How did that happen? Well, the French are one of the most warlike nations in history. They have a record 1,115 victories in various battles. France has constantly interfered in the matters of other countries. They would be the first to recognize the independence of the United States. France would create the largest and most famous mercenary army, the French Foreign Legion. But they always mix brute force with soft power. French is one of the major international languages. France will be home to one of the first universities in the world, the movie and the bicycle will be invented here. But most importantly, the French would invent the crucial things that would enable Europeans to conquer Africa and control other less developed parts of the world. How would France succeed? And why does Paris continue to influence the world and its former colonies today? These are the most important symbols of progress in the 19th century. The Eiffel Tower, the Statue of Liberty, the world's first London Underground Railway, the first transcontinental railroad in the United States, the Brooklyn Bridge, and the Suez Canal. All of them would have a dramatic impact on the future history of mankind. But what do the French have to do with it? Well, they will invent half of it. Look, the 300-meter tower in Paris will prove that high-rise construction made of steel and iron is incredibly efficient and beautiful. Plus, it's one of the first projects where cranes would be involved. Just try building a house today without all that stuff. Statue of Liberty. As you know, this is a French gift to the Americans, and today it's almost the ultimate symbol of America, freedom, democracy, and everything else that is usually attributed to Americans. The Suez Canal is one of the most profitable enterprises from the past which still feeds its owners, because it is the shortest trade route from Europe to the Middle East and then to India and China. Everybody used to sail like this across the whole of Africa. Also, the Suez Canal will be praised as a triumph of progress, the victory of European science and technology, and the power of humans over nature. Indeed, it wasn't easy to dig 160 kilometers of desert without normal construction equipment and fresh water in the middle of the 19th century. French businessman and diplomat Ferdinand de Lesseps was responsible for this. Later, he would be awarded orders from France and Great Britain for his efforts. Firstly, these countries, and not Egypt, where the Suez Canal is located, will own this trade channel for almost a century. Secondly, the Suez Canal will pay off in just 6 years and will become the most profitable construction in the world. By the way, very few people initially believed in the project. For example, the British Prime Minister claimed that the Suez Canal was a pathetic attempt by France to seize the Mediterranean, and British engineer Robert Stephenson, who would build the ultra-modern Britannia Bridge, by then described the plan as ridiculous. Why is this video about symbols of progress and profit? Ask yourself, what do you associate France with? Here are the first ideas. I'm sure they will be the Eiffel Tower and most likely something nice about freedom, equality, fraternity, wine, cheese, and baguette. And it's all true. The French have a great image as enlighteners and fighters for democratic ideals. They have probably the best cuisine in the world and well-known, proven technology like Airbus airplanes and nice cars from the past like Renault, Peugeot, and Citroën. And yet France's success story is one of the bloodiest and most aggressive in the world. Remember when I said that Europeans got the keys to Africa thanks to the French? Look at this English map of the Black Continent from 1805. It clearly shows that Europeans had explored no more than a third of Africa by then. The vast territories and the depths of the continent are marked as unknown parts. Now look at this map. It's modern and it shows where in Africa the highest risk of malaria is. And let's combine those maps. There's no overlap. Europeans have been unable to conquer Africa for centuries because a huge part of it is what is called the fever belt. Malaria, meningitis, yellow fever, these diseases mercilessly killed those who wanted to plunder these lands. The death rate of colonizers sometimes reached up to 950 people per thousand, while the local Africans have long been immune to these diseases. This is why the Black Continent is called the grave of the white man. But a couple of French explorers changed everything. In 1820, they extracted quinine from tree bark for the first time. What is quinine? It relieves fever and pain, but most importantly, it becomes the ultimate cure for malaria. From that moment on, white Europeans were no longer afraid of African diseases. They took their latest technology and steamships to move quickly along African rivers and built railroads to bring soldiers and food deep into the continent and the deadliest firearms to massacre the local tribes. Technical superiority and ruthlessness took over and divided almost all of Africa in a couple of decades, and France got the biggest and most attractive territories. It all started in the north, to be more precise, from the territory of modern Algeria, right here. Firstly, it's not far away, very close to France. Secondly, the Algerians have been brazen for centuries. They pirated in the Mediterranean Sea and demanded tribute from almost all European countries. They said, if you pay, we will not touch your merchant ships. But of course, the final decision to seize the neighboring land was based on classical imperial whims. You can get resources out of a colony. In the case of Algeria, it will be grain, livestock, minerals, fertilizers, timber, cheap labor and oil, and you can sell something of your own to the country. Plus, France, in the mid-19th century, was a very criminal place. The Napoleonic Wars had just recently ended and the French had suffered greatly. There were many unemployed people and former soldiers on the streets who needed a place to live and work. That's when the idea of a French Foreign Legion comes up. What's that? Basically, it's an army of voluntary mercenaries whose life in society has failed, but they wanted to live a beautiful life. They were mostly adventurers, usually with criminal backgrounds. And they were the ones France sent first into the most dangerous areas. Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, Sudan, Madagascar. The legionaries were not just conquerors, they were used to violently suppress any uprisings of local discontented inhabitants. Today, officially, they do not have blatant criminals in the French Foreign Legion. Besides, to get there, you have to undergo a qualification procedure, but the principle of mercenaries, to unfairly use the result of someone else's labor on someone else's land, this principle is relevant even today. Since then, since the middle of the 19th century, the French Empire has begun to grow to its maximum size. Obviously, the most powerful French positions were in Africa. In the Indian Ocean, France took control of Madagascar and many islands around it. In the Pacific, colonial troops occupied Vietnam and Cambodia and influenced southern China. They also ruled French Polynesia and New Caledonia. In the Atlantic, France took over islands in the Caribbean Sea and territory north of Brazil. But the truth is that French possessions could have been much larger if not for the most lucrative property deal in the history of mankind. Here it is, the historic Purchase Treaty of 1803, which is safely stored in the National Archives of the United States. According to this treaty, the Americans purchased more than 2 million square kilometers of land from France and Napoleon. On a map, it looks like this. Today, it's the territory of 15 states, and France sold it all for only $15 million. So look, the American government got the entire central part of its future country for just 7% per hectare. But why on earth did Napoleon agree to such a ridiculous treaty? Because at that moment, the great General Napoleon was not interested in America at all. Why would he want New Orleans? Berlin, Vienna and Moscow awaited the conqueror, and all these campaigns demanded money. Bonaparte was in such a hurry to transfer American bonds through British bankers that instead of $15 million for Louisiana and the surrounding area, he received only $8.8 million. That's in cash. But the truth is that the French realized that it was costly and futile to fight over the American colonies. At the time of the record Purchase Treaty, former black slaves kicked the ass of the French on the island of Haiti. And a few decades before that, France lost a war to the British over its own colony, Canada. By the way, do you know why Canada, the second largest country in the world, is called Canada and not New France or something like that? When the French explored this land, it was inhabited by Indian tribes. They don't have abstract concepts in the language. Clock is a very precise term, but time is abstract. You can't touch it. So the colonizers communicated with the Indians and tried to understand the name of their land where the French had just arrived. The Indians answered Canada. But that's not really the name of their country, it means village or settlement, and one of its largest cities is Montreal. In French, it means Mont Royal, the Royal Mountain. It seems to be a story from the past when great European countries remodeled the whole world to their liking and owned empires. But in fact, France still controls a lot since its past, namely 13 overseas territories. Why? For example, let's look at French Polynesia. It seems that these are just some small beautiful islands on the Pacific Ocean, 15,500 kilometers away from Paris. It's literally half of the globe. What do they want there? Well, firstly, France has several military bases there. This is where they tested their atomic bombs 193 times. They just detonated them in the ocean. But something around the islands is much more important. France's maritime property is about 5 million square kilometers. That's more than the entire European Union. Now look at the humble islands of Mayotte and Réunion in the Indian Ocean near Madagascar. These islands are now officially France, with a population of almost 1 million people. And there are military bases here too. With the help of their small forces, it is possible, for example, to close or control the Mozambique Channel, which is important for shipping and world trade. South America. There is a space rocket test site in Guyane. The Pacific Ocean is close to Australia, and the islands of New Caledonia, which are also officially French, also have military bases there, close to the most important trade routes. Plus, New Caledonia has strategic nickel and cobalt reserves. These are important fossils that are critical to making batteries and other future technologies. Why am I listing all this? Colonial empires haven't gone anywhere. They just evolved into more economically profitable forms. Why fight over land with millions of poor people and then support those people in huge armies to control everything? It is more efficient to keep strategic bridgeheads and, most importantly, economic control. Have you ever heard of the African franc zone? It is a monetary union of 14 countries, former French colonies. Each national currency is pegged to the euro exchange rate, which is actually convenient because the euro is stable and very easy to plan and trade with. But in order to guarantee the stability of this exchange rate, all of the African franc zone is obliged to keep half of their foreign exchange reserves in the French treasury. What does that mean? It means that if any of the African countries want to do something that Paris or the European Union doesn't like, Paris can block the reserves. Of course, if you look at France's main trading partners, former colonies, are not at the top of the list. That is, we cannot say that France cannot live without them. That would be a lie. But the colonies' dependence on Paris is obvious. Look at the list. For all these African countries, France is in the top 3 trading partners. That is, they either sell or buy a lot of stuff from French companies. Plus, you wouldn't believe it, France also maintains military bases in sovereign states on the continent. And since the 1960s, when African countries officially gained independence, Paris has been involved in local conflicts at least 46 times. The bloodiest one is the war in Algeria, which lasted for 8 years. And interestingly, until 1999, the French government didn't call it a war, but a restoration of public order, which ended with Algeria's independence. But remember, I started the story with a picture of the French national team at the last World Cup. Compare it to the same French team from 1984. See the difference? In fact, it's an honest reflection of what's happening to France right now. Some call it colonization in reverse because there is information that almost a third of those who hold a French passport were born abroad or have immigrant parents. I don't mean to say that migration is bad, that we should close the borders and all that nonsense. 2 of the greatest French soccer players, idols of boys all over the planet, Zidane and current star Mbappé, have colonial roots. Mbappé's dad is from Cameroon and his mum is a descendant of Algerian immigrants, and Zidane grew up in Marseille after his parents moved there from Algeria before the war. And there will be increasingly more stories like this in the world of the future. After all, these are only two countries on the planet that can provide themselves with cheap labor: India and China. Everyone else needs someone from abroad. The Americans have started issuing a lot of green cards so that migrants from all over the world can win the opportunity to live and work in the United States. Russia needs guys from Central Asia. Look at who works in delivery services and maintains the housing and utilities industry. And France depends on labor from Eastern Europe and Africa. What's the point of all this? You must have heard the famous phrase, "You become responsible for what you have tamed." It's from the philosophical fairy tale The Little Prince. Its author is the Frenchman named Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He was a professional military pilot and even served in the French colony of North Africa and Morocco. And for some reason, it seems to me that modern France is an illustration of this important idea. Yes, the French Empire brought civilization to the colonies, built infrastructure and provided education, but at the same time it extracted and somewhere continues to extract resources. But one day you have to pay for everything in life. People have forgotten this truth. As the fox said in The Little Prince, but you must not forget it. You become responsible forever for what you have tamed. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to react to the video, like it, comment, share it with your loved ones, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and see you in the next episode.